welcome back in for another episode of the Idea Collision. My name is Andrew Green. I'm the host of the podcast, and I'm a minister here at the Waukesha Church of Christ in Waukesha, Wisconsin. I am a facilitator for a grief support group organization, and so we have links to some of these things. So I draw on my experiences and just observations kind of over my life and in the things that I do to try to improve life some way through this podcast. And we're going through a series of podcasts on the younger generations and paradoxes in the younger generations. And I emphasize this in every one. If you watch every one, you kind of, in this miniseries, you see me kind of say the same thing. And I do this because if someone doesn't see it, then I want them to have context. And these are designed to be isolated. So some things are repeated regularly. And I want it to be emphasized that saying that there's a paradox in a generation or in a group of people is not to disparage them. That's not the purpose of it. But it is to, it's not, to say that one generation is superior to another. Right, and in fact, really, the idea of generalizations of these different groups of people, whether they be old, young, whatever, they're kind of arbitrary. Like, who decides when a generation starts or ends? And sometimes you'll see why you say, well, the millennials are this to this, or the boomers are this to this, and sometimes those aren't really even good indicators. So there is an arbitrary nature to it. When we say Gen X, or we say boomers, or whatever we say a group of people, we generalize millions and millions of people, and probably there's no person that fits into the exact the exact stereotype. So would you say that, for example, 70-year-old people in Ukraine are exactly like 70-year-old people in the U.S.? No, of course not. Why? Well, we'd say, well, there's different culture, right? There's a culture over there, so we wouldn't expect. They've experienced different things, and so their culture is different. Of course, they're going to have different types of generations. The same thing is true here. There's different cultures in the United States. There's, ethnic differences. There's regional differences, and even within one geographical area in the United States, you can have people raised, according to different standards of custom. So they can have a culture within their own home that's slightly different. So we don't want to overgeneralize. There are a couple of illustrations that show the absurdity of generalizations, or placing too much stock in generalizations. And China categorizes their years. I don't know how religious this is now, but there was a point at which they put stock in the idea that there's the year of the dog and the year of the monkey and whatever, like that everybody born in a calendar year has the exact same character map. I think that's kind of ridiculous. Well, you want to go even crazier is to, people that look at horoscopes. It's like, wait a minute. If you're born in, the month of April, all people born in the month of April in human history have the same character and can expect the same things to happen to them. Well, that's stupid. Right, so obviously generalizing large swaths of humanity has a certain risk to doing it. So we want to do this within, within a way that is productive. What's the value then of doing this series? Well, there are trends. We can spot trends. If you knew someone that lived through the Great Depression, there will probably be things that they frequently do because certain events or certain things in our history are overarching. They kind of transcend little things that are happening in your personal household or what have you. It doesn't mean that everyone will go through those things that people do when whereas my generation was raised in prosperity with the 4-year, 5-year exception of the consequences of Jimmy Carter's administration. So for us, things are more disposable, right? And we just kind of, I don't need that, throw it away. But not everyone in my generation experienced that. There are a lot of people who grew up in urban areas and were very poor even throughout the good times. They didn't see the good times. So for them, they will look, maybe they will kind of express or look a lot more like a person from the Great Depression, even though they're not baby boomers or whatever. So, or I guess that'd be silent generation. So I want to kind of, with that, I want to be productive in what we're doing. One of the things observed, I want to get to today's topic. One of the things that the younger generation, the millennials specifically, but it would be also true of Gen Zers, as I have some of them in my home, and I can see them when they're on their couch. So it would be true also, is that they're kind of the selfie generation. And there's different ways that this is expressed, and some of them are, some people will call them narcissistic. Hold on for about 10 seconds and I will get to that one. Some people call them individualistic, and I guess it depends on what kind of spin you're trying to put on it. Now, with regards to the word narcissistic, my observation is that the majority of people who have ever used that word don't know what it means. Narcissism is a clinical observation, and it's used like a slur. And people who use it that way do not understand what the word means. Narcissism is the inability to really to feel empathy for another person. It's really actually very dangerous to have it. Very few people have true narcissism, where they, a person with narcissism, you could be like an alleged friend, someone really close in their circle, you could be experiencing a tragedy, like a significant tragedy, and they just have no ability to really feel for you. I'm not saying they understand you, but I'm saying very few people understand unless they've gone through the exact same thing. But they don't even have the ability to feel bad for you, really. I mean, truly. They might say they do, but a minor inconvenience in their day is much more, powerful to their day than your major thing. I stubbed my toe this morning. Well, I've got this major thing going on. Yeah, but I stubbed my toe this morning. So they feel their own thing. That's true narcissism, and they are dangerous people. Because in a moment they can just decide they want to do something, and they can't feel the impact of what that will do to other people. So it makes them very dangerous. There's not many true narcissistic people. So I don't believe that the millennials are narcissistic, right? So when we say selfie, let's look at the word individualistic, because that sounds nicer, right? And that's where I want to spend my time today. It's a nice idea, being individualistic, but I find this to be incorrect. Not because of a lack of character in millennials, but it's just because they happen to be human beings. That every generation, I think, has liked the idea of individualism. My generation loved this idea. So it's not a thing of millennials. I guess it looks different. The technology looks different. Probably best summarized for us in a few songs. But the one that I think of, 1989, Madonna had the song "Express Yourself," right? And we were all about expressing ourselves. In the 80s, that meant wearing bizarre clothing, which was typically neon colors, very, very flamboyant, having strange hairstyles. So like half of my hair is missing over here, and this side is neon pink. Or I did not do that. I guess I wasn't a good Gen Xer, but that was the idea of expressing yourself. Well, to look at contradictions and paradoxes, is not exclusive to any generation, because a year later, the very same artist, Madonna, came out with a song called Vogue, which, champions the idea of doing what everybody else is doing in popular culture. And so here we are. Express yourself, be very individualistic, but do so in a way that everybody is doing. That's kind of this individuality, conformity thing that we love, right? And I don't keep up with music, but I expect that someone familiar with a lot of music, if that's what you're into today, would find the same contrast in music, where even within one artist, where they'll talk about all I think Lady Gaga had a song something to that effect, but I expect if I look through her catalog of music, there would be a lot of songs about conformity too. I don't know, but not a Lady Gaga fan. I apologize for that. So there's when we look at individuality, there's a lot of buzzwords that you'll be familiar with. So diversity is a buzzword. Equity is another one. Inclusion, acceptance is a buzzword. Tolerance, identity. These are all buzzwords that surround, and they're all good words, by the way. I mean, if your eyes are twitching, just look at the words themselves. They're all wonderful words, that used in a proper context. The problem with these words is not the words themselves or how millennials use them or whatever, but it's that people don't really mean them, right? The ideals that are expressed in the word itself are not really meant by the people who use these. People are kind of just as misled about that as they are about the word narcissistic. It's not used properly. Now, I'm not accusing millennials of being insincere. I think they're very sincere when they use these words. I think they would like to hold these values. But the problem is that these values go against our human nature. You can look at any viewpoint that is discussed in the world today, in the public forum. In these words, if you, like I say, you probably your eyes are twitching when you hear these words, because you understand what they're connected to, and deeper ideas and broader ideas that these are used in relation to. And take any viewpoint that is discussed, right? Any one of these topics that I'm talking about, these viewpoints, and what the accepted viewpoint of the majority is, don't you? You can just, any one of them. I'm not even going to give one, because you know them, and you know what the accepted viewpoint is. And so if you want to do a test, do your own test on the validity of individuality. Just go out there in a public forum anywhere and express the opposite viewpoint of the majority view. Now, you might actually genuinely hold the majority view, but you might not, and just we just soft pedal it, or we lay low. Right? We don't go out there and express an alternate opinion, because we understand. We want to be accepted. We have friends that they hold this view or what have you. We want to be accepted. That's a deeper value to us than being individualistic. I like being individualistic right up until it would exclude me from a group. So I let me express myself, but let me be in vogue. And that's really the primary and secondary. There's one value, and then there's a secondary value, and we will always give up the secondary value to hold on to the first one. And you know, if you do that test, you're going to see reactions to your expression, your individualism, and depending on where you are and what the viewpoint is, you will find a wide variety of responses. Now, it might just be like an insult thrown your way on Twitter. In some locations, in some places, you can lose your job. And in certain locations, and depending on the topic, you can actually face legal ramifications for not being in line with the majority on certain things. So you are going to get resistance and disapproval. There comes a point where all that tolerance and stuff goes right out the window. People don't tolerate someone who doesn't want to be in vogue. So that's just. But we like the topic of diversity, right? We like the idea of it, but we just don't like the follow through. And again, that's it. It's not a millennial thing. That's a human thing. And right now, millennials are struggling with it because of their age, because they're kind of at an age where, you get to I guess you get to my age and older. So I'm 50 this year. I'll be 51 here shortly. And you get to a certain age and you don't care. You actually don't care. I mean, very little. But when you're still in that, there's still an age where inclusion is extremely important to you. And so it was the same when I was young, and the older generation was one that didn't care. Well, guess what? If you can do that to any generation, they wanted inclusion. They wanted to be accepted. And so they went along with whatever the majority was at their time. So saying we like the topic of diversity. Okay, let's look at that, right? But people will treat other people identically in contrast to this view of diversity. It's like we like kind of like a view of diversity, but diversity for us means everybody in this individual small group has to be exactly the same. It's called intersectionality, is a word that's used today for that. Everybody in a particular group is identical, but so we have diversity, but this group is this group, and then we're going to look at this group, and this group they're all the same here, and you can look at what happens. Take an ethnic minority, right? Take an ethnic minority who does not look, act, dress, and vote. I don't want to veer into politics, but that's if they step out in any way from what they're expected to do, people express shock, disbelief, disapproval, and will hurl insults at them. We like this idea, but it doesn't really exist. Like in the United States, I grew up when I heard in history class about the Great American Melting Pot. This idea that all these ethnicities come together and we're all just mixed. Like this magical thing happened in the United States that doesn't happen anywhere else. Well, it didn't really happen. The problem is that too is a myth. Because I can go to my hometown. It's not a major metropolis, but it's not a small village. So there's a lot of different groups there. Guess what? I can take you to the Puerto Rican section. I can take you to the Italian section. I can take whatever section you want. I can take you there. All right? Because it's not really a melting pot. We find a group, and that group looks a lot like us. And that's where we feel accepted. And that's where our customs are the same. That's where our speech is the same. That's where our dress is the same. That's where we are accepted. We crave that acceptance. And that will override my feeling for individuality, or the need for the feeling of individuality. Right? On a personal level, you can look at this on a big level and on a personal level. On a big level, look at companies. We're all for these values of diversity, and so they express these views. Well, guess what? What happens as soon as they express a viewpoint? We've seen it multiple times in the last couple of months. As soon as one of these companies expresses a view that now they've offended a different group, and that group of people says, you know what, we're not buying your product anymore. Then all of a sudden they backtrack. The Dodgers the other day had a group of people. It was a very offensive thing that they did. And they backtracked from it as soon as there was a backlash. Well, there was a backlash to the backlash, and so they did it again. They're like, okay, we're gonna have this group back in. We had canceled them, but now we're gonna uncancel them, and we're gonna bring them back in. It's like the perceived backlash to the backlash was considered worse than the original backlash. It's like, right? What have they shown? They've shown that they don't have any value. They don't have any identity. On a personal level, it works much the same. We hold a view, but we will be willing to change if there's a strong enough disapproval on Facebook or on Twitter or on whatever, or maybe it's at work or maybe it's at school, whatever. If there's a perceived thing that I'm stepping out of line on, I didn't really mean that, and it's we talked about truth, and we talked about logical fallacies, and one of the logical fallacies we talked about, if you go back to those early podcasts, was the appeal to the majority. The majority is strong in terms of how we buy into it and how we are influenced and shaped by the need to be approved of by the majority. And so if we perceive that the majority is on the wrong side, we will often kind of try to find a way to get from where we're at in our individualism to over there. And in doing so, we will often sacrifice actual values that we have, not fake values, but not just things that we've kind of thrown out there, but an actual value that we have, that we know, things that I know. I might be tempted to kind of slight those or swallow those or change those or moderate those, right? Whatever your view, whatever your favorite word of choice is, those views will change and be altered because of my need for acceptance. And so it becomes destructive. And one of the ways it becomes destructive, and this is, I've been trying to talk about emotional health and things like that, and bringing this into a spiritual level. We talk about peer pressure and things like that and what that does. And we will sacrifice genuine values. There's an instance in the Bible, really on kind of a lot of the same topic, the racial diversity and things like this, where Peter, who had a definite value, in fact, he was one of the first to express this value, the first in the New Testament that we know of, to express this value, where people who were not Jewish would be allowed into church together with a Jewish person, and the majority of religious people, Christian people, they were like, well, we don't know if you can do this, Peter. And so a small group of them came up and pretended to represent the majority. Maybe they did, I don't know, but they pretended to represent a very important person. Now, they had already tried to sort this out, but then this group comes up and said, no, basically this important person has changed their mind. And so all of a sudden, Peter himself, the person who had championed this value, finds himself doing the opposite, and he would not even eat together in the same room as non-Jewish people. Well, that's not going to be good for a church. And so in fact, it says that he was such a hypocrite. The word is hypocrite. I don't know. It's used harshly for him because he knew better. that another person who was even more a person who was so a guy by the name of Barnabas was very much about inclusion of people and trying to genuinely extend an olive branch to people. He did the same thing, right? It just kind of this group mentality kind of, well, if James is doing it, then I better do it. And then so he says, well, if Peter's doing it because James is doing it, well, I better do it. And this group mentality, you don't need Facebook. You know, we see it on Facebook, but you don't need Facebook historically for this feeling of being accepted by the majority, or the not even necessarily the majority, but sometimes it's just the dominant group, whatever it is. We have that need for acceptance, and we will change our behavior, and we will do destructive things for other people. But in the long run, we will do destruction to ourselves, because we will lose identity. Right now, millennials are 40 years old or approaching 40 years old. Well, guess what? That means they're entering this part pretty soon. They're going to be who they are, and we're going to start looking at them like we look at my generation, where, okay, guess what? There's not hope for the generation itself to change. They have to change now. They have to find an identity now, because they have this shifting thing with the majority, and it's accentuated because of social media. And if they have an identity of no identity, that leads to something called crisis. So it's important for us to identify truth, and whatever it is in your life, you need to identify truth and cling to that truth, regardless of the majority, regardless of how you think it will affect your identity if you continue. So I encourage you to go through it and look at the values you have when you're by yourself, the things you know. And you're going to have to be deliberate in holding on to those things in certain situations. Not saying you have to be obstinate with people, but you do need to be deliberate in holding on to your values. So we'll see you next week.